Hey folks, good to see everyone again. In this video, I just want to talk through one of the topics that I think has been on tons of people's minds since everyone went remote in 2020, and that is how to run meetings well in a remote environment. Even in the real world, meetings would run over schedule. You'd often find they were unproductive. You'd have more meetings than you ever wanted. People didn't want to be there. People didn't even know what was the point of meeting. This always bothered me immensely at Go Squared. It was always something we were working on to try and improve. I just wanted to share some of the top tips we've learned along the way for running better remote meetings in general, but specifically better remote meetings. The first step is actually not the meeting itself, it's everything before the meeting. It may sound really simple. Before you even think about having a meeting, why are you having a meeting? Why can this not be an email? Why can this not be a Slack message? Why can this not be some sort of quick decision or written document? If you decided it needs to be a meeting, generally a good reason for a meeting is you need to get people on the same page. You maybe need to make a decision. Usually I think meetings break down into kind of two key areas. One is to try and broaden a bunch of ideas. So you might have like a couple of ideas on the table and you want to make sure you bring people together to see if you've got all those ideas. Maybe there's like 50 more ideas you want to get before you start narrowing down. And that's important because you're kind of trying to expand the number of ideas rather than narrow down. The other one is you're probably trying to make a decision. You're trying to bring people together to focus and get clearer on what a next step is. Usually meetings that go wrong are trying to do both of those at the same time. If you think about that, like maybe it's sort of deciding on a feature to build and half the team are trying to come up with new ideas and more ideas, and then half the team are trying to narrow down on ideas and come up with a clear action at the end. That's chaos, and it's really important to be as clear as possible that you're doing one or the other. And usually it doesn't work if you're doing both at the same time. Secondly, before the meeting, making sure the time and the date are really clear and who's needed in the meeting. So to do that, there's this great thing called a calendar, and you can use that to invite people in, believe it or not. But it's really important, like the number of meetings that happen where it's decided like 5 minutes beforehand you should have a meeting. Sometimes that's okay if it's just like usually a one-on-one thing, but sometimes it leads to chaos because people feel left out, people feel like they're not included. So making sure there's a clear meeting time and agenda and that participants are invited to that meeting is just a really sensible thing, and it's a simple thing, but it really avoids a lot of chaos if you do that. Now, obviously we're all remote, so making sure the Zoom link is in that invite as well is really important. In the previous world, we'd obviously have a location for the meeting. Essentially, your Zoom link or your Google Meet link is required just as much as the location was required in the past. So making sure you've got that is also just as important as the time, really, because if you don't have that in there, how are people going to know how to dial in? The number of times you accidentally dial into a Zoom call when actually people are meeting on Google Meet or vice versa is crazy. So just make sure it's done. Finally, like having an agenda ahead of the meeting is a really good idea. Increasingly, since going remote, we've made sure we have every meeting documented in Notion. I've done a few videos on Notion in the past, and we'll probably do many more in the future. I really love Notion for collaboratively writing as a team in a remote environment and in a real world environment. But having that agenda and notes for a meeting is really helpful. What's really great is putting the agenda in and making sure people contribute beforehand. It can actually make the whole meeting run so much more smoothly if people's thoughts are documented beforehand. I would just highly recommend that. And that's all before you've even had the meeting. I mentioned Notion just there, and one of the things that we really love about Notion is they give a template for how a meeting should run. And so when you're diving into the meeting itself, if everyone's following the same agenda, the same script, it's a hell of a lot easier to get the meeting happening well. So a couple of things that we have in Notion that are really handy is we always have the date and time, we always have the participants listed, we have an owner of the meeting. And that's really important because the owner should be responsible for the meeting starting on time, ending on time, making sure you follow the agenda, making sure you move through points on time and give enough time for each topic. And making sure things are written up and clear actions and outcomes are taken at the end. That should all be the owner's responsibility. Everyone should know who the owner is, including the owner. Making sure that that's all solid ahead of time is a really good way of making a meeting run better. But also making sure that the owner isn't afraid of that themselves. It sometimes means being bad cop, for instance, telling someone to maybe pause or wrap up their segment if they're running over time. It's all for the greater good of making sure the team gets the best out of the meeting. In addition to that, having a clear agenda with clear notes is written up is really important. So that owner should ideally have that agenda and then each kind of topic with the notes taken, and then at the end have the outcomes written down. And ideally the outcomes should be clearly assigned and have time boundaries on them. For instance, if one of the outcomes is James needs to get coffees on Wednesdays, it should be very clear that James, and that's me, is going to go and get a coffee on Wednesday, and that's the outcome of the meeting. Very important meeting. Also, in terms of making use of meeting notes in the future, tagging them up and making sure there's some way of finding them in the future is really handy. So for instance, if you have regular meetings, making it easy to find previous ones. Notion's tags are really handy for that, but other tools have tags as well. That's just a really nice way to make sure those notes remain relevant. One final thing that we find really helpful, I find really helpful, in a remote environment, we've been recording a lot of the Zoom meetings we have. One of the reasons we do this is it really helps you to reflect on how a meeting went. So I'll often play back a meeting that I've done and just look at how I performed in the meeting and how I could have run it better. That might sound a bit cheesy, but it's a bit like when you have a sports team, you're gonna replay how a match went or a game went to see how you can improve. And I think anyone who's keen to be a good leader, a good communicator, recording things, playing them back and seeing how you did, seeing where you did well, seeing where you could have handled things better is a really good way to improve. In addition, doing recordings also makes it easy for if people couldn't make the meeting and maybe they don't want to read the notes, they can watch a meeting back or listen to a meeting back at a later point, and they avoid missing out on too much. A final good reason for recording meetings is also it can reduce a lot of extraneous chat and also can reduce the likelihood of anyone talking bad about anyone. If people know that they're having a work conversation and they're talking amongst themselves, and maybe there's people that are not in the room but may have access or be able to watch the recording in the future, it really cuts down a lot of that potential for any back chat or any other nonsense chat that might come about from a meeting that might go off the rails. So recordings really help keep meetings more focused and more on the ball, make them all in all better for everyone involved. So that's just a few of the ways of running a meeting better. The last thing I wanted to talk about was just after the meeting, making sure that the doc that you've written the meeting notes in and had the outcomes in is shared around is a really good idea. Ideally, that meeting doc has a recording as well so other people can see it. Making sure it's all written down and easy to read is just a great way to make sure the meeting is wrapped up and finalized. Hopefully, if you follow those steps and keep watching back and replaying things, learning, you'll get better and better at running meetings. And for us, I know that's helped us out tremendously. Generally, we now have fewer meetings, but we also have meetings that run on time, have clear ownership, clear outcomes, and all in all are just generally a lot better for everyone involved. Hope that's helpful. If you've got more tips and tricks for running good meetings, I'd love to hear them. Please do let me know in the comments, and hopefully that's been helpful, and catch you soon. Cheers.